Hey everyone, welcome back. Thanks for joining us for the second part of our story. Let's dive right in. I love you too, Tom said. He leaned in to kiss her, but she turned her head. Shocked and humiliated, Tom stepped back and walked away without saying a word, not stopping until he and Eve were far from the main house. Tom couldn't help but notice the heavily armed security guards stationed nearby. With Eve's back to him, he pulled out his phone, activated the voice recorder app, and observed that he somehow had 2 bars. A weak signal, but enough to make a call. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. "It's so beautiful out here," Eve finally said, trying to break the silence. "Yeah," Tom replied, his tone flat and non-committal. They reached a wooden park bench by a small pond and stopped. Eve sat down, and Tom followed her lead. "What's going on here?" he asked. "You're a smart man, Tom. Why don't you figure it out?" she replied. "I have an idea, but it's too horrifying to think about," Tom said. "Why don't you just come clean and tell me?" he urged. "All right," Eve began. "As you know, Janice has been chosen to be Darren's next executive assistant." "Yes, I already know that. Janice told me," Tom interrupted. "But there's more, isn't there?" "Yes, there is," Eve said. "Your life is about to change, Tom. Whether it's for the better depends on how you react. You know Janice loves you, don't you?" "I've heard her say so, but frankly, I'm having a hard time believing it right now," Tom admitted. "Trust me, she does love you, and she wants the best for both of you. That's why she's willing to do whatever is necessary to guarantee your future," Eve explained. "You do support your wife and her career goals, don't you?" "Of course, I always have," Tom replied, but he felt like he was back on a battlefield, crawling slowly across the sand, scanning for mines beneath a high-tech, heat-dispersing cloak. "I'm glad to hear you say that," Eve continued. "Then you should understand that the next year or 2 will only be a minor bump in the road. A blip in the long journey of your happy marriage." "A year or 2? Tom asked. "She mentioned 6 months. Why are you saying that? What's going to happen over the next 2 years?" Eve paused before responding. "I'll get to that. My role is to prepare you for what's coming and to ensure that you fully understand and embrace Darren's expectations for you and your wife." "Why should I care about Darren's expectations of me? I don't answer to him, and he doesn't sign my paycheck," Tom growled, his patience wearing thin. "No, he doesn't," Eve replied, "but he does sign hers. And your acquiescence will make Janice's job a lot easier." "Acquiescence? What the hell are you talking about?" Tom shot back. "I'm sure you've noticed that Darren is what most people would call an alpha male," Eve stated, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. "In other words, he's a self-absorbed, narcissistic a-hole." Tom growled at her description, and Eve chuckled. The first genuine sound she had made, and the first time Tom believed her. "Let's just say he expects people to fall in line and do as expected. That includes Janice, and by extension you," Eve said. "In other words, he wants to screw my wife and expects me to just accept it?" Tom's temperature was rising, but he kept his voice controlled. "I wouldn't put it quite that way, but essentially yes," Eve replied. "In fact, they've already been intimate several times." Tom's face showed the pain of the revelation. "And you know this how?" he demanded. "I was there," Eve said matter-of-factly. "I recorded it." Tom's jaw dropped. "You're kidding, right?" "Not at all." "Here, take a look," Eve said, handing him her phone. "You might find this interesting," Eve said, handing Tom her phone. He watched the short video of Janice and Darren running like animals. "This is interesting," Tom replied. "Mind if I keep a copy? It would come in handy for his divorce," he thought. "Not at all. I saved that clip especially for you," Eve said, using the phone's Bluetooth to transfer the file. Tom saved it to his phone. "Tell me, Tom," Eve continued, "how's your love life been lately?" "Not that it's any of your damn business, but it's been practically non-existent the last couple of months." "Why?" "Actually, it is my business. The reason is simple. Darren instructed Janice to cut you off most of the time. He's quite possessive of his property." "What?" Tom growled, his anger rising. "And she just went along with it?" "Of course. He's her master now. She answers to him, just like all his previous assistants did. And he'll expect you to answer to him as well." Tom cringed at the term master. He can expect in one hand and shit in the other. "Let's see which one fills up first," Tom snarled through gritted teeth. He noticed the smirk on Eve's face and felt an urge to wipe it off with the back of his hand. So what does this a-hole expect from me? Money? Hardly. Eve chuckled. He expects your obedience, your submission. And tonight, he'll expect you to publicly display it in front of the other senior partners. What the hell are you talking about? What does he want me to do? The dynamics of your marriage are about to change drastically while Janice is in her current role. To reflect that, Darren has documents he needs you to sign. Documents? What kind of documents? They state that you willingly surrender your marriage rights, property, and assets to him while Janice serves as his assistant. Afterward, he'll expect you to comply with his demands. Tom's jaw tightened. His demands? Yes. He'll expect you to get on your knees in front of him, in full view of your wife and the others, and perform a sexual act to completion. Eve said, her face emotionless. I know it's hard to hear, but Janice expects it as well. She's eager to see you comply. In this way, you will relinquish all authority in your marriage to him, for as long as he decides to keep her. Let me get this straight, Tom said, his voice shaking with rage. Your a-hole boss wants me to sign everything over to him, let him screw me in the ass, and then suck his dick in front of Janice and the executives? Are you kidding me? I'm not kidding, Tom. And yes, that's exactly what he wants. He also expects you to swallow, and so does Janice. The whole encounter will be recorded on video. Of course, Tom spat. So he can hold it over my head? Sounds like extortion or blackmail to me. You make it sound so tawdry, Eve said nonchalantly. But yes, the footage would be used to keep you in line. After you've submitted, Darren will take Janice to bed. They'll leave for New York early tomorrow morning for the weekend. And where will I be while they're off playing in New York? Tom asked. You'll stay here, confined to your room. You'll be fed and monitored. When they return, you'll drive Janice back to your residence and follow her instructions without question, Eve explained. So if I understand correctly, Tom said, his voice dripping with venom, I'm to be screwed in the ass, made to suck an a-hole's dick, then kept prisoner here against my will. And what do I get out of this? If you go along with Darren's program, you'll be left relatively unscathed, except for some minor humiliation. Once he's done with Janice, you'll be compensated. And let me guess, Tom growled, murder in his eyes, you, that a-hole, and my soon-to-be ex-wife all conspired to destroy my marriage, take everything I've worked for, and literally screw me over. Am I right? I wouldn't put it quite like that, Eve replied. But I suppose, from your point of view, yes, we worked on this together, Eve said in a neutral tone. Did he pull this same crap with his other assistants? Tom asked. He did, Eve replied. And they went along with it? They did, Eve confirmed. In fact, their husbands enjoyed it tremendously. What would it hurt? Janice would love to see you pleasure her master. I'm sure she would, Tom sneered. They can both kiss my ass and screw off, he hissed. And you can tell your a-hole boss that if he tries anything with me, I'll make sure it's the last thing he ever does. I understand you're angry, Tom, and you have every right to be. But you would benefit in the end in more ways than one. There's more? Tom asked, shocked. The document also requires you to obtain a vasectomy at your earliest convenience, Eve stated calmly. Additionally, it specifies that you will accept and take responsibility for any children Janice and Darren produce. She even plans to make a show of flushing her birth control after you sign. And if I don't go along with all this bullshit, Tom snapped. Let's just say you wouldn't like the consequences, Eve replied. A few men tried to fight Darren and ended up penniless, convicted as sex offenders, and thrown in prison for illegal videos that just so happened to be discovered on their devices. You know what happens to sex offenders in prison? It's not a pretty existence. That sounds like a threat, Tom said coldly. Call it what you want. All right, I will, Tom replied as he reached for his phone. He paused, saved the audio recording of their conversation, and scrolled through his contacts. After verifying he had a signal, he selected a number and held the phone to his ear. What are you doing? Eve demanded, her face flushing with anger. Tom smiled, holding up a finger to his lips to silence her. Sheriff Jackson, the voice on the other end, answered. Uncle Bob, how are you doing? Tom said. Stone, what's the word? Dad was right. I need an extraction. Fast. You got the address? I got it, son, Bob replied. I also have the coordinates from your phone. What's your sitrep? At least 15 heavily armed men. There's a gate at the entrance. Code is 6973, unless they've changed it since last night. Hansen and 3 of his executives are here, along with his trainer. She just gave me the lay of the land, so to speak. Got it all on audio. I'll send it to you. Copy that, Bob said. We're on our way. ETA, approximately 5 minutes. Can you hold out that long? I think so, Uncle Bob. As long as you're willing to call it self-defense. And thanks. My pleasure, son. Wouldn't want anything happening to my favorite nephew. What about Janice? Tom asked. According to Hansen's trainer, she's an accomplice and already a willing pawn for Hansen. Tom sighed. So we drop her? I'm sorry to hear that, son, Bob said sadly. Yeah, Tom muttered. Me too. Well, you hang tough, young man. We'll be there shortly, Bob said. With that, Tom ended the call and sent the audio file to his uncle. What did you just do? A frightened Eve asked as Tom put his phone away. Who did you call? I called in the cavalry, Tom replied with a smile. I need to get back to the house and warn the others, Eve stammered, starting to rise, clearly shaken by the sudden turn of events. Tom shook his head, gently grabbed her hand, and guided her back onto the bench. I think not. We'll sit here and enjoy the sunshine for a few minutes. Might be the last sunshine you ever see, he said, allowing himself a satisfied smile. I think you've bitten off more than you can chew this time, Darren, Ryan said as Janice and 4 men took their seats near the large pool behind Darren's house. Why? Because Janice's cuck is a former Marine? Darren scoffed. Big deal. What's he gonna do? He's alone, unarmed, and surrounded by my private platoon of armed security. If he rejects Eve's proposal, we'll go to Plan B. Just be careful, Rick cautioned. Don't worry, Darren said dismissively. I've got it all under control. We'll spike his drinks tonight, and when the time comes, he'll be more than happy to suck my bird. I can't wait to see that, Janice cooed. Are you going to make him swallow like the others? Of course, Darren said. By the time this weekend is over, your little cuck will be begging for my meat, he added, making Janice giggle like a schoolgirl. Just don't push him too hard, Ryan said. He's not like the others. They were weak. He's not. Darren sneered. No, they're not all the same. This guy's a combat Marine, trained to kill. You need to be ready for anything. Settle down, Ryan. I've got this, Darren said sharply. Then, after a pause, he added, but I am curious about something. Why didn't you know about your husband's service? Well, it's like Tom said. He never told me any details, Janice replied. All he ever said was that he was in the military. Doesn't matter, Darren snorted. He's going down tonight, and your career will skyrocket. What if he files for divorce? Janice asked. Then I'll ruin him like I did the others. He'll end up in prison on sexual assault charges, or worse. Don't worry, dear. I'll take care of him, Darren assured her. What's that sound? Glenn asked, looking around. Everyone froze, listening. The unmistakable thrum of helicopters filled the air. Suddenly, one of Darren's security men ran up to the pool. We got a problem, Mr. Hansen, he panted. What problem? Darren demanded. Before he could answer, the sound of shouts and scuffling erupted. Seconds later, 2 uniformed deputies in body armor emerged near the pool, rifles at the ready. Freeze! One of the deputies ordered. Drop your weapon, he barked at Darren's security man, who quickly obeyed, unwilling to risk getting shot. More deputies poured in, swiftly placing Janice, Darren, and the others in handcuffs. What's going on? Darren demanded furiously. I'll have your badges for this. Quiet, one of the deputies snapped. You're all under arrest. He proceeded to read out a long list of charges before concluding with their Miranda rights. As they were escorted around the building, the group saw 4 helicopters, a bus, and 3 large vans. Officers were everywhere, leading disarmed and handcuffed security men to the bus. Janice's eyes locked on Tom, who stood nearby, calm and composed, next to a large man in a khaki uniform. Tom, she whispered, stunned. What's going on? Janice cried out. Tom, and the large man walked toward her. Your little party is over, Janice, Tom said calmly. Oh, and I apologize for forgetting my manners. Janice, this is Sheriff Robert Jackson. You remember my Uncle Bob, don't you? Uncle Bob? Janice gasped weakly. I didn't know you were a sheriff. I guess it slipped my mind, Bob said with a smirk. Tom, please. This is all a big misunderstanding. You have to believe me, Janice pleaded desperately. No, Janice, Tom said coldly. I don't have to believe you. In fact, I don't think I've ever been more shocked or disappointed in my entire life. I'll be visiting my attorney as soon as possible to have divorce papers drawn up. As of right now, you're dead to me. Do you understand that? With that, Tom grabbed her left hand, pulled off her rings, and slipped them into his pocket. You son of a bitch! Darren snarled, struggling against the two deputies holding him back. I'll be out of jail in no time, and when I am, I'm going to kill you. Do you hear me, you piece of shit? That sounds like a threat to me, Tom remarked, smirking. What do you think, Uncle Bob? Sure sounded like one to me too, Bob replied, his grin widening. We'll just add that to the rest of the charges against him. It'll help ensure he never gets bail. Don't worry, Mr. Hanson, Bob added with a chuckle. My boys will take good care of you. Turning to the deputies, Bob barked, Get these people out of here. The deputies quickly complied, escorting Darren, Janice, and the others to the waiting bus. Tom and Bob stood silently, watching as the perpetrators were loaded up. Tom felt a deep ache, like the last several years of his life had been a lie. He had loved Janice from the moment they met. Bob placed a hand on Tom's shoulder. It'll get better, son. Trust me on that, he said. Bob, having gone through a divorce with a cheating spouse years ago, knew exactly the kind of pain Tom was experiencing. Thanks, Uncle Bob, for everything. You're welcome, son. If you need anything, give me a call. And tell your dad I said hello. I think he's got a bottle of his best whiskey waiting for you. I will. Is it safe for me to grab my things? I need to get the hell out of here. Sure. I think they're finishing up inside anyway, Bob replied. After saying their goodbyes, Tom packed up his belongings and went home. 1 week later, after spending time with his father and commiserating, Tom visited the family attorney and had the divorce papers drawn up. In accordance with their prenuptial agreement, he waited until Janice had been served before visiting her in the county jail. This will be the one and only time I visit you, Janice, Tom said as she took her seat. I just need to make sure you got the papers. I got them, Janice said quietly. I've already signed them and sent them back. Good. As I'm sure you noticed, I followed the prenuptial agreement. I'll wait until after your trial to dispose of your belongings. I appreciate that, Janice replied softly. But there's one thing I don't understand. How did you know? You'll hear the full story in court, but I'll give you the short version. About 4 months before Memorial Day, the estranged husband of one of Darren's so-called assistants approached my dad with a wild story. He brought spreadsheets and documents he claimed his estranged wife had taken from Darren's system. Dad asked me to look them over. Of course, I couldn't say anything to you. Privilege and conflict of interest and all that. It took time, but we eventually found what we needed. Evidence of Darren's shady financial dealings with some very unsavory characters. Your lover did a decent job of hiding them, but not good enough. A couple of weeks before that weekend, my dad turned everything over to the feds. They were more than interested in Hanson's dealings and had already planned to raid the office sometime in June. Dad warned me to be extremely cautious that weekend. He shared what his contact had told him, even though it was hard for either of us to believe. We also spoke with my Uncle Bob, who, as you know, is the county sheriff where Darren's property is located. I hoped nothing would escalate, but things didn't go that way. Carson informed me of what you and your so-called master had planned. By the way, I recorded that little conversation. I'm glad we live in a state where only one party's consent is required for such recordings. I do have a few questions for you, though. What do you want to know? Janice asked. How long before that weekend were you screwing your so-called master? About 2 months, Janice replied. Tom was surprised at how candid she was. That's about the same time things fell off between us. Did he tell you to cut me off? Yes, she admitted quietly, her face flushing red. I suppose I should get tested for STIs then, Tom said flatly, causing Janice to squirm in embarrassment. Did you really want to see me suck your lover off? Janice looked down, avoiding her husband's gaze. Well, Tom pressed angrily. She looked up at him, her eyes filling with tears. Yes, she admitted again. You knew I'd never agree to something like that. I would rather die first. So why? Because I was so infatuated with Darren that I would have gone along with anything he wanted, Janice said, her voice breaking. You don't understand. He enjoyed the feeling of power over everyone around him. If I didn't comply, he had what he called a plan B. You mean the drugs? Tom asked. Yes. They found the vial with the chemical he intended to use on you, she admitted. I had nothing to do with that, Janice claimed. That's interesting, considering they found your fingerprints all over the vial, Tom replied sharply. Janice's eyes widened in shock. That's not true. I never wanted to hurt you, she sobbed. The evidence says otherwise, Janice. Not only did you cheat on me, but you also plotted and schemed with your so-called master to destroy me as a man. So no, there's no way back. No forgiveness. Nothing. As I told you before, you're dead to me, Tom hissed. Janice wept hot tears, but she didn't argue. I've wasted enough time on you, Tom said coldly. Goodbye, Janice. Enjoy what's left of your miserable life. Before I go, though, I need to let you know something. She looked up at him, trembling. I have a few friends in prison who are looking forward to meeting you, he said. It'll be fun. With that, Tom stood and walked away, utterly unmoved by her tears. After several court appearances, Janice, Darren, Eve, and others were found guilty of all the charges against them. As the ringleader, Darren received a life sentence in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Having played smaller roles in Darren's illegal financial schemes, the three executives were sentenced to 20 years each. Eve and Janice received somewhat lighter sentences, while several others in the firm faced charges for their involvement. A few cooperated with authorities, providing testimony against Darren in exchange for immunity. By the time the dust settled, the Remington Law Group no longer existed. Tom's divorce from Janice was finalized quickly, thanks to her incarceration. He boxed up all her possessions and placed them in storage for her parents to collect at their convenience. On July 4th, Tom celebrated Independence Day with his father and Uncle Bob. They marked the occasion with a barbecue and fireworks, joining the rest of the nation in celebration. Bob brought a guest to the festivities and introduced her to Tom. Tom couldn't take his eyes off her, an attractive, shapely brunette with warm brown eyes. Her toned legs, shown off by a pair of short denim cutoffs, made it difficult for him to focus. Son, this is Marcia Simmons, Bob said. She just moved here from Dallas and started working with me a couple of weeks ago. You're a deputy? Tom asked, intrigued. I sure am, Marcia replied with a confident smile that lit up her face. She's also a former Marine, Bob added. An MP, like your dad. Marcia's expression brightened further. Semper Fi, she said, holding out her hand. Ora, Tom replied, shaking it firmly. Tom flashed a wide grin. I think we're going to get along just fine. I think so too, Marcia agreed. Would you like to grab a beer? Sure, Tom replied. I could use a fresh one myself. He went over to his father's ice chest, grabbed 2 beers, and handed one to her. Your uncle mentioned something about your last up sounds, Marcia commented as they sat down. Yeah, Tom said quietly. The divorce will be finalized soon. Marcia looked at him, a hint of sympathy in her eyes. How about you? I saw the mark on your ring finger. Were you married too? I was, she replied. Apparently my husband wasn't, if you know what I mean. One night, I came home early and found him in bed with his secretary. And in my bed, no less. I'm really sorry to hear that, Tom said, shaking his head. If you ask me, he was a fool. I agree, Marcia said with a small smile. At least we didn't have any kids. Tom raised an eyebrow. Do you have any kids? No, thankfully, she replied. We've been talking about starting a family, but then things went south. The two of them talked for the rest of the evening, enjoying each other's company. When the fireworks show began, Bob and Tom's father set off the display. The night ended with Tom feeling lighter, convinced that he'd met a kindred spirit in Marcia. Are you ready to head back? Bob asked as they finished watching the fireworks. I guess it's that time, Marcia said before turning to Tom. I had a wonderful time, Tom. It was a real pleasure meeting you. I had a great time too, Tom replied. And I'm really glad we met. Actually, I'd love to see you again if that's okay. That would be more than okay, she said with a broad smile. Here's my number. She handed him a card with her cell phone on it. My uncle keeps me busy, but I'm usually free on Saturday nights. Call me? I will, Tom said, grinning back at her. He noticed the wink and smile from his uncle. I'll call you Thursday, he promised. Talk to you then. Marcia kissed him on the cheek. Take care, she said before walking away. After they left, Tom's father remarked, Nice-looking young lady. Yeah, very nice, Tom said, his grin wide. You better keep your promise to her, his father added. Absolutely, Tom replied. His father slapped him on the back. Good man. Now, come on, help me clean up and let's finish off the rest of that beer. Tom laughed. Are you giving me the day off tomorrow to sleep it off? Nope, his father replied with a chuckle. As they cleaned up, Tom's mind was still on the sweet brunette with the most amazing legs he'd seen in a while. Waterloo, he thought. Where will you meet your Waterloo? Everybody has to face their day of reckoning. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories like this. See you next time.